Hello and welcome to the STCfit Learning Podcast. I'll be your host today. My name's Ben Scott. I'll be joined by Jason Galea. Thanks for joining us on our way to create 1 million positive outcomes for personal training clients by 2030. The podcast is brought to you by @STCfit Learning, a page created to upskill and educate PTs and gym nerds. Also brought to you by @STCfit, and that's a place for all your online and in-person personal training needs. If you enjoyed today's episodes, please give us a share and tag on the Instawebs. You can tag @STCfit, @STCfit Learning, @BenScottSC, and @JasonGalea PC. Hope you enjoy the show. Yeah, welcome to the people that are here live, and obviously everyone watching back, and eventually when this makes it onto the podcast as well. Ben here with Jason and Max. Today we're going to talk about putting the client first and making sure that we use a lens of when we're looking at data and programming and nutrition and all the facets that go with coaching, looking at what the client needs and then looking at everything else rather than going the other way around. So I figure, I don't actually know that much about your history, Max, in terms of coaching and all that sort of stuff. Like I know you've worked with athletes and Gen Pop, done a bit of athletic stuff yourself. So maybe give us the spiel of how the Performance Hub gym owner that stands in front of us today got to where you are, man.
I think it's probably a pretty similar story to a lot of people that end up in this industry, is that as a kid, I played every sport I possibly could, was always very, very active. And I joke now that I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So it was more like I went to uni twice. I did a commerce degree and I lasted about 2 weeks before I just dropped out and did a gap year. And then I tried to do a psychology degree. And then again, I did another gap year. And then it just turns out the thing that I would always do for free was fitness related. So I was always like coaching people. It was always like internet forums, back in the day, T-Nation forums and stuff. And so then I just decided I may as well just go full ham on this one thing that I'm willing to do for free and try and get paid for it. From there, just started off doing regular PT. I did an exercise sports science degree and ex-phys. Then I started working, like you said, with athletes, so doing sport club, strength and conditioning. Did a little bit of clinical EP work, realised pretty quickly I didn't want to do that. And then after a while, I started working again with Gen Pop alongside athletes, just because I think a lot of people think like working a sports club, strength and conditioning is, like the mecca. And in some ways it is. In other ways, you get over it. Like it's short-term contracts, there's no job security. There's a lot of hours for not much reward. Did Gen Pop for a while. And then how the gym started is we were looking for a while for somewhere where we could do things exactly how we wanted to do them. And we couldn't find anywhere. So we decided the obvious solution was to just start our own facility. So we did that at the start of this year.
Sounds very familiar, the last part of that story. Yeah, that's cool, man. What did you specialize in when you did your EP stuff?
So it was called Clinical Exercise Rehabilitation, which qualifies you as an EP. Yeah. To me, I think EP is one of the more broad terms. Everyone knows what a physio does. Yeah. No one really knows what an EP does. So mine was more rehab specific. When I studied anyway. More that kind of stuff. And then with the exercise sports science degree, did like kind of double major in that. One of them was sports nutrition, and the other one was ex-phys. So,
yeah, cool, nice. Yeah, I had a friend of mine did exercise phys. I think like the first year was generic, and then you had to pick a realm. So it was like rehab, cardiac, something else.
Yeah, so it's still like, it's weird though, because like all of them qualify you to do the exact same thing. So yeah. It's more like you're going to be better at one, but you can technically do it all.
What are you going to pass the test the easiest for?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I can tell you if I ever went down that road, not cardiac, because I tried to read some of those units. Fuck.
Oh, like you lose it so quick, right? It's like, how quickly you lose like anatomy knowledge if you're not like directly doing it. But like, look at your ECG now. I'd have absolutely no chance. I have no idea what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So the first topic that we wanted to, I guess, touch on is building client relationships. So I might even just throw to you first, Jace, like sitting down with a client for that first consult, first time you meet them, is there things in place that even then you're starting to create this like archetype of that specific client and what they're going to need and building communication styles and all that sort of stuff with them?
Yeah, I think so. Like it comes with a bit of experience and you obviously have to get comfortable in that consultative setting. Like there's probably a lot of coaches out there that kind of just want to get that out of the way. They're awkward. It's awkward to sit in front of someone in a chair when their whole, profession's out in the gym floor on their feet, kind of getting their hands dirty and stuff on the tools, when all of that stuff kind of falls in place in the right spot when you get comfortable sitting in front of someone and just asking the right questions, and also making that setting as comfortable as possible. Like it doesn't really matter if it's someone who's, an advanced athlete or a trainee who's trained for a really long time. That can still be a really awkward setting for them. There can still be some barriers put up and they may not give you all of the answers because either the setting was wrong or how you approached the questions was wrong, or even just how you portray yourself as well. So that obviously will trickle down to a beginner who's never been in the gym before. So you've obviously got to do your best to kind of make that setting as comfortable as possible. Let them know what's going to happen. I think a lot of people are like, I've got a consult with a PT, like they're going to fucking destroy me. Like, I'm unhealthy, I'm unfit or whatever. So they just think like, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to make fun of them the whole time or something. So if you just say like, look, this is an opportunity for us to get to know each other. We're going to ask some questions about your history, get a really good idea about what you want to achieve, short and long term. Then we're going to put together a bit of a plan of like how I would, move you along towards those goals. And I think if everyone thought about it in that way and asked questions that they know why they're answering the question, rather than like, here's a templated document that I got off the internet from some super coach. And like half the questions, like, I don't know the fucking why you answered that and what to do with it. So it's like, ask questions you can get information with. And then after that, it's like the rest of the dominoes start to line up. So you can start to knock them down.
Yeah. Anything for you, Max, to add on to that?
No, I agree with everything there. I think for me, like I was probably somebody that was resistant to doing it initially, like probably everybody is when they start out, right? But nowadays, like I think if you have the mindset that this is the best opportunity for you to build the relationship with the client, like you don't want to find out something 3 months in that would have changed how you started, right? You want to find that out at the start. So I think I definitely agree, like definitely asking as many questions as you can and asking like open-ended questions. And then I think the best thing you can do is ask them questions based on the answers they give you to your original question. What's that called? Socratic questioning, right? It's like, if you just go through like questions 1 through to 10, like sure you'll get some information, but if you get an answer to question 3 and then you just really deep dive onto that, you'll probably end up gaining more information than you're going to gain from those 10 questions anyway.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm curious, like working with athletes, Gen Pop, one-on-one coaching, and now like obviously your gym's more of a group model. Is there much difference in this process across those?
Not as much as you'd think, probably. Like, people probably have these like misconceptions about like how you're going to approach it with somebody who has a performance goal versus somebody who has like a weight loss goal. And there's going to be some small differences, but by and large, like we're still working with humans. Like it's all still the same kind of thing. So it's still, yes, asking the questions, like you can stereotype that some athletes are going to be particularly driven. So they just want to plan, execute, go, whereas other people will need more hand-holding throughout the journey. Like, sure, there's going to be some small differences, but for the most part, like the system's the same, the principle's the same. It's just how you apply the principles in the system that might differ a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually had a conversation with a trainer who's starting next week about like what to do during that consultation process, and like started talking about testing and things like that. I think that the biggest difference is like, as a powerlifter, like when I sat down with my coach for the first time, we did internal, external hip rotation assessments and things like that. And that I saw value in that because like my hip hurts and I want it to not hurt. So that was like problem solution, still the same principle of like, let's identify where your biggest roadblocks are and I'll show you the path to the outcome. But sitting down with a Gen Pop client who wants to probably just look better naked and perform better and feel better, it's like they want to see that you can give them that outcome. Laying them on the floor and testing their internal and external rotations, like they don't give a shit. I remember it was probably like maybe 2016, I did a course and learned all this like mobilization and assessment sort of shit. And I started like, all right, this is my consult now. And that's what was sold in the course. And I went out into the gym and my close ratio went from like 85, 90% down to like 55. I was like, fuck, okay. It's like, let's just go back to training. It is important, I guess, to caveat that, like for obviously coaches are listening, in that scenario, it's just the movement becomes the assessment. It's like, okay, what are you going to do with this person long term, and how are they showing them that you're bridging that gap from problem to solution? But do it in a way that like, okay, I'm going to get you to squat. You can assess their squat and see what's going on. You don't necessarily need to assess them in a static state. Like the assessment still happens, but it doesn't need to be like a doctor's surgery where it's like tick cross, or you have this many degrees and you should have this. Like people don't care. And this will be, I think, the theme of the whole sort of thing. Most people don't give a shit how much you know. They're more interested in how invested you are. Because if you're invested enough, you'll find a way to get them an outcome anyway.
Yeah, those assessment approaches is like, as good as they are, like they kind of almost trickle on the border of like a clinical setting. Like you look at it, but in a clinical setting, most of those people are not forced to be there, but they kind of have to be there. And when they go in, they kind of know that the buy-in from that person on the other side is like a doctor and all these. And so those tests they just like appreciate those because of the authority on the other side. When you walk into a gym and you're just someone who wants to lose weight, but nothing really hurts, they don't really appreciate, like we just said before, like the buy into that. So you've got to find another way to do those assessments that, is still going to kind of get them to go, oh yeah, I can still see I'm working towards my goal. But you can kind of, decipher, okay, well, there's a little bit going on here. So we might do this and we might do that. Because it's really cool to know all this stuff and know what's happening in that joint, know that it should be this many degrees of this rotation and this here. But like, if I said that to, anyone in the first 3 to 4 years that I worked with, they would just be like, oh, I don't really care. Like, just tell me how to lose weight and, and feel better kind of. So it's it comes with experience to know what to look for. I think you still need to kind of know what those assessments are, but I think you should try your best to formulate an assessment process that is your own reflection of all that information with the person that you're working with. So you can interpret what's happening and you can come up with a series of steps to work someone towards whatever they need to, rather than like all of these models that people design, everyone's trying to imitate them. Like you don't really want to imitate them. You want to take what's good from them and then put your own persona and your own, kind of clients and all, and your demographic, I guess the best way, and work it into a model that works for you. And I think that kind of comes with a little bit of experience as well. Obviously, like, you've got new coaches coming in. Obviously, you give them a model, they're just going to do it. But you don't want to be that dogmatic where it's like, I got told this, I have to do this. It's like, find a solution to the people that are in front of you.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you guys can hear that reversing truck out the back. Yeah, awesome. We're doing well today. Someone's building a deck at Jason's house. I got trucks out the front of my place.
Just at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, we really need this office. Yeah, I think, taking that whole lens of like, okay, this is the best way to get to know my clients before they even start, and it's the best way for them to get to know me. And it's so common, like how many personal trainers you hear like, I hate sales, or I'm shit at sales, or whatever. And it's typically, this is the part that they miss. It's like, just build a relationship with them. Just like we kind of said before, like find what their struggles are, show them how you could take them to solution and identify what that solution is going to look like for them. And then if you are going to go and train them or something like that in a face-to-face setting, then make sure that it correlates to that outcome.
Yeah, so I think that's massive for most people that like you say, don't like sales. I definitely didn't like sales, and I still don't like sales, right? But I think as soon as you switch to the idea of like, all I'm going to do is ask questions from this person. From that information, I'm going to say like, what's their main problem? And then, I know how to fix that problem. So then I present how I'm going to fix the problem. And then by the end, like, it doesn't feel like anything like that. You're just talking to them, getting to know them, you're building that relationship. And by the end, like, everyone's like, how do you overcome objections and yada, yada, yada. Like, most of the time, you're not going to have an objection. If you understand what the person's telling you and they understand what you're telling them, it's all going to work out for the best anyway. So I think as soon as you really start to understand that, and obviously that comes with confidence, experience, and all the rest of it. But I think that's a big change for a lot of coaches. Like, everyone wants to go and do like sales training. It's like, yeah, sales training is not bad, but also maybe have a system to onboard your clients, maybe have the ability to ask the right questions and have the ability to understand them and then present the solution, because that's going to give you, I guess, more value than like how to overcome objections 101, for example.
Yeah, the biggest objection that people get is due to the failure of the potential client seeing the outcome. It's like people buy ridiculous stuff at ridiculous prices because they can see the value in it. So as soon as they can't see what they're getting, perceived value drops, and then it's, I've got to think about it, or whatever the early out is. So like you said, that whole process becomes a lot less kind of like pulling teeth when you approach everything in the right manner. Like at the end of the day, like coaches want to get into a position where they're pre-framed. They kind of have an idea of what you're about. They have an idea of what your service is, and then you sit down, you ask all of the questions, and then they're like, cool, I made the right choice sitting down with this person because I liked them before this. And then everything they're talking about is about me. So all of a sudden it doesn't become how much it is. It's just like, are you available? When can I start? And you've sold that person before they came in, because it's not about the money now. It's about the outcome. And a lot of coaches are in a position where they're scared, they're not confident, they don't know how to work with people, they don't have to talk to them. And then they have to convince them to sign on with you. Like, oh, you should do this and I'll do this deal for you. And if you get this many, I'll do you this. It's like, I don't know. Like I found that, one, less fulfilling, and two, it was less successful. And you can create this, like what we call it, an ecosystem where people can just kind of get a little bit of an idea of what you do. And then once they sit down, you've got this system involved to just go from one stage to another with the client and guide them through this whole process. So while at the end, they're just like, I can see you getting me this outcome. I want in, and then they're like thanking you for taking them on board and stuff. It just totally flips the mindset. And it's so much more effective. And then you've got that relationship as well.
Yes. So swinging it back, obviously, to the title of the episode being coach clients, not numbers. I'm curious for you guys. I know with my consultations, usually between 40 and 60 minutes, the last 5 minutes is when I talk about my service. Everything before that is about the individual and seeing where they're at, what their obstacles are, what they think they might need to do to change them, and just investigating the individual as much as possible. And maybe even like showing that you understand what I find real big value in is understanding how people have made the mistakes that they have. So it's not good enough to kind of just say, well, that's a mistake. It's like, oh, you did a 1200 calorie diet. That was dumb. It's like, well, no, like you obviously understand that somebody did a 1200 calorie, like aggressive diet because they wanted fast results and they wanted that before and after. But then just explaining to them, how did you go on the back end of that? Like, if you have to go do that again, do you think it really worked? It's like that sort of education along the way. That's not me saying, oh, so what I do is like, we track macronutrients and we do a weekly check-in and we do like 3 different applications of nutritional tracking or planning or programming over a week or over a phase, it's like that they don't care about that. It's what they want to know is like, okay, you understand that this is the thing that I'm trying to achieve, and you're identifying a mistake for me and then showing me maybe a better way to do it. So yeah, I kind of skipped over the question and answered it myself, but you guys, start with you, Max. Like, what percentage would you say, like, if your consults are talking about the individual to what your service actually is?
Yeah, probably very similar these days. And again, like it didn't used to be. Like I came up in the FMS era, so like it would have been like the most involved movement assessment known to man. Told them how deficient they are in every area, and funnily enough, they weren't real motivated at the end. But no, these days exactly right. Like really, even with the movement assessment, usually for me, that actually happens after that initial consultation. Like I don't actually include it because if I fully understand their problem that they're presenting and their goals, then if they have a movement restriction, it doesn't actually matter at that start. Like unless it's severe, right? Like unless they're like, I've got one leg, I'm like, okay, cool. We might need to figure out some different strategies there. But even then, I'd be like, okay, cool. Like we can still work around that.
Yeah.
So all those assessments for me probably happen after like your initial consult, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, it's just asking questions, getting to know the person. And a lot of the time, like what I find, I don't know if you guys find this, they'll answer their own questions. Like they know deep down what they've done wrong previously. And you know, I already know a lot of the time, like if someone walks in, okay, cool. I know what you're roughly going to say based on, you know, we've talked on the phone, now you're here, etc. But yeah, it's going to be a long conversation about them specifically, like what they want, what hasn't worked before, why they think it didn't work, what help do they think they need, etc. Like how much do they know about what we do? Because a lot of the time they'll just answer the question as well, like, oh, I think you guys would be great for X, Y, and Z. So again, like they already know. And then, yeah, it's going to be a real wrap up at the end and go, okay, cool. So here's what I do. So here's, you know, how I think we can solve it. Bang, bang, bang. What do you think? You know, every time they're pretty much going to say yes. If I get to the end of that process, like it's going to be so easy. I think if you try and skip ahead and after 10 minutes, you're saying, oh, so what we do is, you know, and you start talking about yourself and your services, you know, and you're trying to say, all these minute details because you're nervous, that's when you go wrong. But I think, yeah, similar to you, it's mostly talking about them and then a wrap up at the end of this is how we're going to solve the problems and, you know, we'll start next week. And usually,
I think the one-legged guys is a great, I guess, example of like, even in that scenario, it almost doesn't change. It's like if a guy with one leg comes in who wants to lose weight, it's like, all right, we'll work around that. These are the principles and the method that we follow. We're just going to have to adapt that based on whatever's going on with you. I think that's a really great example to not get caught up in that minutia of one little thing, if that makes sense, and then diving into like, oh, well, I'll manage your volume load and your intensity and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't give a fuck, mate. I just want to lose weight. Yeah.
I think you're spot on there. And I think the other thing that's massive is I always try and be positive. Like, even if someone's like, I've tried 15 diets and nothing works for me, you know, it's like, you could sit there and go, oh, yeah, like that's no good, you know, people are telling you like their metabolism shot or whatever. But for me, it's like, you want that person to always feel like there's nothing wrong with them, you know, they haven't failed previously. So for me, it's like, even, you know, when you're asking the questions, pre-framing into a sense of like positive, or like, don't you think it's great that you're still willing to come and put yourself out here and have this talk with me today? Like little things like that. So they're always feeling a little bit more empowered. So I think, you know, if that person starts to feel deflated through that conversation, you're going to be struggling at the end as well.
Yep. Jace, how about you, mate?
So I think it depends on the person that I'm working with. Like, obviously been doing this for a really long time, so I can kind of just gauge off that person, like what I will call it a personality type just because they have been identified, I guess. But I work with like a lot of the same person. So I can, you know, kind of work on the fly just based off that initial 30 seconds, whether it's going to be a long consult or whether it's going to be a short one. And you can kind of gauge off how they answer the questionnaire, just how to deliver the information. Like if they're really short answers, very direct, it's like, cool, that's how you deliver and absorb information like, this is my jam, I love it, I'm going to talk to you exactly the same way back. If you give me a essay about your goals, like you obviously want to know a little bit more about what's happening and want a little bit more conversation, you'll generally find the hey, how are you is really, kind of extended, and you just kind of open up and chill. So yeah, I think that like at the end of the day, the questions get answered. I think it's just really important to know that there's got to be a little bit of flow with it, depending on who you're working with. And it's like that, like with the best way possibly trying to match a mirror, just with that environment. It's just like, if they're chilled, they sit back, even if it's in a consult, like in this setting, do the same. Like if they're in your face, like, maybe meet them halfway and just kind of like, talk in a similar fashion, just so, they're receptive to the information. But I've kind of found that like the consult just has gotten shorter over time. And so like, I'm better at delivering the information. I tend to work with the same person a lot now. So yeah, they kind of know what's going to go down. And like I said, the system's just set up to be for me to obtain the information and us to go, all right, let's get into the good stuff. I know as much about you as I need to, and this is what's going to happen, and the fun stuff, get into training, get into working together. But just leaving the door open, like if you want to streamline that process, like it's good for business, like, time and all that. You don't want to forget that there's a person on the other side, like, because, I'm typically not face to face anymore. So I still have to keep that door open and be like, I'm here whenever you feel like you are confused, whatever. It's like, this is how we, deliver questions. This is how, we respond to them. This is what I'm going to do for you. If you ever need anything like that, just do that in that way. I think like setting those boundaries, it's good for the coach. It also makes the client feel really good and trusting to the person. And that's something that doesn't get like, I guess, brought up in that whole relationship as well. Is just like, where are the boundaries and where are the expectations from both people? It's like, what are you expecting of me? What am I expecting of you? And how are we going to do it? And this is where you can see some people, they get caught in the like, I'm available 24/7, man. It's like, are you really 24/7? Like, it's like, are you sure it's not just within working hours and you'll give them an answer within 12 hours and, you do it in this space rather than like ringing your phone at Saturday night when you're out for dinner with your wife or something. Like, I think if you set those expectations, like that relationship actually starts to get better, because it's like, one, it becomes serious. Like think about any business where you walk in and they're just like, this is how it works. These are the terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're like, oh, cool. So I'm going to, kind of follow this. And I think, and there's a degree of like professionalism behind it. So it kind of just sets the tone from that perspective, and that person kind of respects the service and the person delivering it as well.
Yeah. It's just about, like you said, setting those boundaries within that relationship. I think one thing that people miss out of the consultation process is like, the biggest thing of getting a client outcome is buy-in. So to get buy-in, you have to have someone like you and trust you before they're even gonna like the days that they're like, if they look at their program, they're like, no, I don't really think Jason knows what the fuck he's talking about. It's like, they're not going to execute that program as well as they should. Yeah. So it's like, you've got to build that relationship that they're actually invested in you and you're invested in them. And that's when you start to get the outcomes. Like shit, we were talking about Polyquin during the week. It's like, you can't argue that the biosignature method got fucking wicked results. It's like, we look back at it now and go, oh, that was probably not very accurate, but fuck, it churned out a ton of results at the time. Just because people believed in it and they adhered to it. It's like, if you adhere to something and refine it over a long enough period of time, you're going to get an outcome. So just building that relationship with the client from the get-go before they're even a client, hands down, one of the best methods to produce buy-in with the individual, much better than look how smart I am, in terms of getting client outcomes. So we'll move on to the next point. Hopefully they don't all take 30 minutes, because I've got a few of them. It's just like subjective data points and interpretation. So we're probably moving on now to like that week to week. Someone signed up with you. What are you looking for subjectively from an individual on a weekly basis. Obviously, Jason and I are heavily online focused. Max, you do some online work as well. And I can officially say I'm doing face-to-face again because I've done one session.
Welcome back.
So yeah, just like maybe the differences in online to face-to-face, but what subjective data do you want to get from a client and how much value do you see in it?
Yeah, I think subjective data, like I've probably changed my tune on this a little bit over the past few years. Like I think everyone does, right? You get, as soon as certain technology comes out, you just want to focus like, oh, this is amazing. This is like the best thing ever. But these days, I think subjective is at least as valuable as objective data, if not more in some cases. And it's like you said before, like buy-in, and then also like just effort. Like effort over time is the most important thing for pretty much every result ever. Like you can do a shitty program and do it at 110%. It's going to work better than a good program done at like 60%. So those subjective data points become really important. I'm also probably of the opinion that the technology and some of the objective data isn't at a point where you can truly measure someone's, feelings, but also like stress, sleep, all these things. Like there's holes in that. So, and then we also know that how someone feels impacts how they perform. Like that's well documented, right? Like the psychological factor is massive. So for me, like I want to see not necessarily like a recovery score, but I want to see like how does someone feel on a day-to-day basis? Like, do you feel recovered? And like, I don't care how people track that. Like if it's a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, a green, orange, or a red, just track that in some way. I think that's really important. Same with stress. Like how stressed does someone feel? What's their sleep quantity, but also how's their sleep quality? And again, that's a subjective measure. But we can all relate to like, I felt like I slept like shit last night, so now I feel like shit. It's more than just a number. And then what I do for a lot of clients is I use like an RPE, but I use a daily RPE, which is kind of a summary. And I'm like, just give me a number out of 10, how you feel. Okay? At the end of the week, I'm going to average that out. And if someone's like repeatedly at like an 8 out of 10 RPE, which is like a combination of like stress, recovery, all these things, I'm like, okay, cool. There's something going wrong. You're probably not going to be able to sustain this workload with this level of stress outside or this poor sleep or whatever. That's an alarm bell. What can we do to fix it? And, I think if you combine that with some objective markers as well, it becomes much more valuable.
Yeah, 100%. And that's like pretty similar to our method. Hey, Jace.
Yeah, I think the more I coach people online and use the model that we have, I almost like in some cases don't even need to look at the objective data once you look at the subjective part of our check-in procedure, just because, it takes into consideration like the feelings of the individual, their perceptions of, the week that's gone or whatever the period of the check-in that it is. And I guess their major concerns and feelings as well, or their major concerns, sorry. So, we talk about these obstacles that, manifest themselves from life or themselves or training or something like that. Numbers don't really give you an idea of what that is. And if it doesn't really give you an indication of how to fix it for the person. Because, all these people are spinning different plates. So, even though I typically work with a similar person from a demographic perspective and goal, like their lives aren't the same. Their responsibilities aren't the same. Their perceptions of effort aren't the same, and their perceptions of fatigue aren't the same. So getting a good understanding of that person, you can go, all right, well, the data says this, you're saying this. So maybe that week it's like, well, I'm not going to change all the cool shit, your macros and your steps and all that. It's like, how about we employ this strategy to manage something like your sleep? Mm-hmm. Or how about we employ this strategy to manage this project you have at work at the moment, which might be don't go from 5 sessions to 4 sessions or something like that. Like, you've got to take the individual. I think the subjective data looks at the individual. The objective data is just like the data that you need to obtain the goal. Because setting the goal up is based on, metrics really. And like, yeah, the longer you work with them, there's a little bit of flavor of the person put in there. Like, some people might not like X style of training. So you try and make the training work for the person, like Max said before. But then after that, it's like, the flavor of the individual comes into the coaching process, and that's where the subjective data has to be there, because you don't want to become that like macro training accountant, which is just like, you know, your workouts this week, do it again, do them next week, or hit your macros. Like, fuck's that going to achieve? Like, you know, so.
Yeah, I think that's massive. And also, like, consider that you brought up goals there. What if someone's goal is to feel better?
Yeah.
Like, and then, you know, I think a lot of coaches chucking on that bias of like an objective measure. It's like, oh, you want to feel better? Great. Like, what's your body weight? It's like, what does your body weight have to do with how you feel? Like, unless, you know, you got a specific goal there, or like, oh, your body fat percentage isn't moving. It's like, if that person's like, I feel great. I'm like, well, you said you wanted to feel good. So you've actually achieved your goal. So I think that's where some of the subjective measures can become really important as well. Because a lot of people, like, they do want to feel, you know, more energetic or less stressed or things like that. Especially if you work with like older Gen Pop clientele. Like, I know you guys probably have done that as well, but a lot of the time it's like, yeah, I want to reduce my stress and I want more energy. It's like, cool, well, how are we going to measure that? Do you feel less stressed and do you feel like you have more energy? Great, we're on the right track. Like, you can't really put a number on that.
Yeah, even ranking the goals. Like, I've got a client who, who wants to lose weight, but like, he's in a high performing corporate job, makes a very, very, very good income. And, you know, his performance reflects his position in his business. So that's kind of important, you know, so how he feels and the decisions that he makes and how much, you know, endurance he has from a mental perspective is almost just as good as the physical goal. So yeah, the physical goal is important, but we still have to be like, you know, how do you feel at the end of the day? How do you feel at the end of the week? Like, are we training? Yeah. Okay. You're still not feeling great. There's something there. We've got to fix it, you know, because that's still fulfilling that goal, which is in alignment with the things that are important to him. His job, being a provider, looking after his family, you know, providing opportunities are the things he likes to do. So if you don't ask these things, like, you end up just like becoming that coach that just thinks they know what's best for their client. And you know, you do that at the start when you don't know what's going on. Like, let's be honest, we all did it. Like, I was a bodybuilder. All my clients were bodybuilders. Like, it didn't matter who they were. Like, I was just like, yeah, cool. Everyone does this. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But as soon as like you just adopt this understanding of like, there's another person on the other side and they've got goals, and you've got a series of steps to get you to the decision-making process. Like, you just make really good decisions and they become intuitive. Like, you guys know it, like, you just know what to do. Like, after a little bit, it's like, you've done this enough, you know the individual, you're just like, cool, I've worked with this person enough. I know how to give them either a pat on the back or a virtual hug or something.
Yeah, like, I think the Prescript guys have the idea between, are you a programmer or are you a coach? And I feel like that's sort of what we're talking about. It's just like, are you just changing macros and programs on a week-to-week basis, or you're actually looking at the overall picture? And it's funny how much you don't even realize it at the time. Maybe it's particular for younger coaches, but how much managing that stuff actually contributes to the outcome you're trying to achieve. Like, how much better someone will perform if they actually feel good.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like the difference between like, are you prescribing or are you describing what you want someone to do? And like,
yeah, that's cool.
Carl and I are always, we use analogies for everything, right? And we always talk about the analogy of building a house. Full disclaimer, I know nothing about building a house, but like, when I'm describing coaching, I always like couch. So like, the way I look at this is like, let's just say like your program, right? It's like, if you say to your client, like, hey, we're going to build this wall. The client's like, okay, great. Like, we're going to build a wall in this house. They don't know why they're building a wall. They just know that you said, we're building this wall. But if you look at the bigger picture, you're like, hey, you said this is your dream house we're trying to build. So we're going to build this wall. And after we build this wall, we're going to build this wall. And after we've laid this foundation on the bottom series, on the bottom story, we can add that second story with like your walk-in robe and your ensuite and all these bells and whistles. But that's why we're building this first wall. And then all of a sudden, it's a very different kind of conversation, right? So if you relate that back to your programming, it's like, hey, here's the program. But it's not just like, go do 5 sets of 10 on a squat, because what does that mean? It means absolutely nothing. Like, 5 sets of 10 just done half-assed is very, very different to 5 sets of 10 executed with a high level intent, you know, focusing on like X, Y, and Z while you do the movement. because next program we're going to really ramp this up and handle some heavier loads. So I need you to do this. Straight away, like, who do you think is going to execute that program better? Yeah. And then long term, who's going to get a better result? Like, it's chalk and cheese, really.
Yeah, and even who's going to give you the best feedback as well for adjustments and changes and manipulations to that rep range and the intensity level and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Just the guys that are watching live, feel free to jump in the chat box and just like add anything that you guys, I think you're all coaches. So anything that you guys do or agree with or disagree with, you can challenge us if you like. I know Aaron will, just because you will want to. So yeah, I think overall, basically the theme is that like the subjective data is just as valuable as your objective data. The more you can learn about each individual person, the better. So just making sure that you've got that in place. I guess in terms of like specific takeaways, Jace, off the top of my head, I think we've got like sleep, mood, energy, digestion, something else.
It's sleep, digestion, motivation, energy levels, hunger, and workout performance.
Yeah, so they're the rate this out of 10, and then more so into the check-in conversations. It's like, what did you do well? What felt good? What didn't feel good? What do you need help with? And just providing that space for someone to be able to actually have a good conversation. Facilitating that within the business system that you have is really important as well.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I would add to this is like, think about the relationships that you develop with a client when you are thinking about them in this manner. Like, everyone's got or had that client where, or done it in a manner where it's just, there's no personality to it. There's no considerations in relationship to the client because you might not have been that great at developing one. Like, it just doesn't really click. Like, you just don't really work that way. They don't really stay that long either. And it's mainly just this barrier that's been put in front between you two, that because of the steps that have been involved to either getting them to where they are there or just how the process is happening. I tend to find like, it's not an accident that retention is way higher with this method. It's not an accident that people, will most likely tell other people how happy they are about what they're getting and the results that they're getting, because they feel like it's more about them than it is about just getting a program and, kind of moving on to the next program from someone else. So I think that's a really, really important thing to mention as well, because there's a lot of coaches are going to tune into this. It's like, you want better relationships, approach it in a way where the client is the cornerstone of it, and try and remove yourself from that. I guess some coaches like a little bit of control and they like to be the person pulling the strings. Like, if you remove yourself from that a lot, or you'll just get a way better retention rate, in my opinion.
So yeah, last thing, just before we move on from that topic, just give Jace you a bit of a chance to nerd out a little bit and show that this shit is actually founded in getting the outcome as well. Like, we've had the conversation around how your perception of a set will actually affect your fatigue. If you want to open that box.
Well, perception of effort, either commences or ceases the set. To be honest, it ceases your bouts of effort. Like, if your perception of effort is that this is really hard and really high, like, that'll send a signal to your central motor command saying, hey, like, let's cease this effort. Like, it's too much, so that differs from person to person. It differs from training age. It differs from a good night and a bad night's sleep. You can see it in someone's blood pressure. You can see it in someone's resting heart rate, that like, if those things are up and the workout sucked and the sleep was bad, it's like, do we need to change anything? Like, should you just have a good night's sleep this week and we'll see what happens? We don't need to change your volume maybe, like, just yet. Like, you had a bad sleep and we're connecting the dots now. But then it's like, if it keeps happening and that perception of effort is really high, we have to then go, okay, well, are we, balls deep in the program, like last 2 weeks or something? Is this where you need to be for a bit? Like, sometimes it's like a bit of tough love. It's like, we're at the point where you kind of need to feel a little bit, a little bit stressed, a little bit overworked. Or is it like that particular person, like, we don't ever want to go there? corporate job, high performing position, family, you know, so it's so important to understand what these metrics can give you, and then really important to understand the person and understand what is important to them.
Yeah.
Because it's cool for me to be like, yeah, perception of effort, central motor command, like central nervous system fatigue, like I'm a fucking nerd, like I love this shit. But you need to be able to go, right, well, how can I make this work for the person, you know, rather than just like talking about nerd stuff. Like maybe I'm going to talk to my clients like this, like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about fatigue. Like, you know, you just tell me what I need to do to get massive and shredded, you know, for where there's a lot of coaches out there that just want, like, they have to portray like their intelligence to, you know, kind of get the authority or build that relationship. And I guess like the last thing is just don't put anything in there that you can't interpret. Like same with the questionnaire.
Yeah.
Like, don't have it in there if you don't know what it does and you can't make a decision on it, because it's just bandwidth that someone's giving you that you can't give them back.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Something that I think overlaps with that I find super interesting. It's like if you film your lifts on a regular basis and you hit that set and you're like, fuck, that feels heavy this today. Or that was slow, or that was shit, or whatever. And then you watch that video back and you're like, oh, that moved pretty well.
Pretty well, yeah.
Yeah, and then like how much better does the next set feel?
Yeah.
Just because you looked at it when actually it's not that heavy and I'm moving it okay. And it's like, oh, this doesn't feel like it's about to crush my soul anymore. So yeah, just like the mindset of like going into a workout, and even just things like understanding. We've talked about it before, like, I'm still like haven't studied the benefits and outcomes of like breathing drills and things like that. I find them to be useful at times for my own training, but what I do find is those people that have the hectic lifestyle, putting in a breathing drill and a nice slow ascending warm up for them, it changes the game as the way they approach their workout. They're not flustered. They've calmed down. They've thought about what the fuck they've got to do for the day. It's just taking 5 minutes out of this hecticness that is their day, the traffic, the change room, the whatever, to get into the gym. Slow down. Sweet. All right, here's the job that I've got to do. Things like that can just change that perception of what the first set feels like.
Yeah, agreed. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, is it like the psychophysiological model of fatigue? Like there's more than just like physical fatigue. There's other elements to it that, you know, contribute to that. So if you do something like take a video of your set and you're not feeling great, but then you look at it, it's like it changes that whole like perception, and all of a sudden like that fatigue drops a little bit. So it's like you don't need to know too much about it. I don't, like, as a you know, a coach who's maybe newer to the game, but it's just like understand that like a lot of things affect someone's understanding and interpretation of what's going on. And like everyone's their worst critic too. So it's like, you know, I feel like sometimes with a lift, like people kind of open up the space of like, oh, this felt like this. So someone goes in and says, hey man, like, you know, you really should have done this, you know, and they're like, yeah. It just wasn't feeling great today. I don't know. Maybe it's just opening up the ability to take feedback. Like they've got to say, oh, I didn't feel that great. So yeah, thanks very much for letting me know how to fix it. Like, you know, there's other things like probably happening there as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing that trainers miss too is like we hold, most of us, Max with a new baby and stuff, maybe we'll disagree at this point, but like most personal trainers will hold their training in the top 3 priorities of their life, if not top 5. So when you have a mindset like that and you're working with people who maybe don't, or even if you're working with people that do, trainers tend to forget their own shit that they go through when they're in the gym. Like what do you go through psychologically, session to session, week to week? How do you feel when, like, if you're a PT, you got heaps of sessions on, or you've just put on 5 new people, or you did a course all weekend, or you had a shit sleep, or like 3 clients canceled and now you're worried about where you're going to find new business? How does all of that affect your training? And just actually being aware of what goes on with your own stuff. So then you can start asking better questions within your clients.
Yeah, I think that stuff's massive. Like one of the things we talk to people about here, especially people that are like those high stress jobs you're talking about, is like the ability to control your stresses a little bit. So we talk about like flipping the switch, like parasympathetic to sympathetic. It's like we want you to be able to turn it on when you're in the gym and go ham. And you were talking about sometimes those breathing drills can be really useful. And I definitely agree. Like, not that I'm a full like PRI nerd here or anything, but I think they have their place. But I think even if you take them outside of the training entirely, so some of the things like, and it's it's a bit wishy-washy, and you need to have a good relationship to implement it. But if you get someone to do some breathing drills like prior to bed, right? And it's like, I want you to do this pre-sleep. I want you to really lower those stress levels. Here's your pre-sleep routine. It's like, that person straight away, if that works, you're going to have so much more of an appreciation of how invested you are, not only in their gym performance, but it's like, oh wow, this person cares like how I sleep. This person cares how I feel at work. Little things like that, and I think that's where you can get and like the next level of buy-in. It's like, yeah, they expect you to help them get stronger, but it's like, oh wow, this person like helped me sleep. They help me feel better, like driving to and from work. Little things like that, I think, are pretty like underrated.
Yes, a little anecdote on that. A client recently who won a state bikini pageant, won the national bikini pageant, has PB'd all of her main lifts, transformed her body and her strength and all of that cool, sexy stuff that you want to get from a client. And she said the other day, like, one of the biggest things you've actually taught me is the dial analogy. Like understanding when to turn dials up on different things, be it training, uni, work, all of those things. And it's like that sort of relationship with a client going beyond, like she got in great shape and got the exact outcome that she wanted to get. But the feedback isn't, hey, you got me really lean, thanks. It's like you actually allowed me to manage my whole life and still achieve these outcomes. It's a really cool position, I think, to be in. And I think it's an outcome that all trainers should be seeking to get with clients.
Yeah, definitely.
So we kind of touched on the check-in process and stuff, but outside of that, in terms of conversating with clients, when you first talk with them, all of that sort of stuff, what do you guys have as like your go-to questions to get this information out of your clients?
I guess I don't have a set standard of questions, just know what I want to achieve. Like in a face-to-face setting, that's very apparent. Like it's just a general kind of assessment of how that person is just, in that physical period of time. Like what's their mental state like? What's, how happy are they? How prepared and ready are they to train? And then, it's like, why am I there? Okay, I'm there to get this outcome. How's your week been? How many sessions have you done? Not in that way. I'm just like, oh, you've been in, last couple of days, or you just kind of open conversation. They'll just tell you like, yeah, sweet, this has happened, that's happened, whatever. In an online setting, it's just a set sequence of questions. It's just like, tell me about the training week gone, give me a bit of dialogue to your nutrition, and just like, how you feel that went. What's the biggest obstacle that, you feel needs to be worked on this week? Do you have any questions that I can help you with, or just any feedback for me just in regards to the coaching and stuff? I think that you can identify most things with those main questions. Yep. And I think it's really important to throw yourself out there to be, I guess, like not interrogated, but for them to just like ask you and like an open book as like you've asked them. So honoring that at the end, I think is very, very important. So it's like, do you have any questions for me? Is there anything I can do for you still? Like on top of all of the things that I've already just asked, I think that just, again, is another brick, to that house, that is this relationship between the coach and client.
Yeah, I think adding on top of that is learning the tonality and language of your client over time and what normal sounds like. So like Jace talked about earlier, like different personalities will have different check-ins. So I'm speaking through the online lens at the moment. So sometimes I'll get a check-in that I actually have to drive the text box open to double what it used to be and read the full check-in. And then sometimes I'll get like 2 sentences. Yeah, training went good. No problems. Thanks. So understanding what's normal for your client because that one sentence might be normal for some people. And like Jason and I have both got those robotic clients that just do the thing each week. I'm sure you do as well, Max. And then you've got the clients that have other stuff going on and they want to talk about it and they want some help with it. But understanding like, okay, the language has shifted from maybe it's an ownership thing. So it started to be like, okay, starting to allow external circumstances to dictate what's going on. That's a warning sign for me. Let's kind of rein that in. Or maybe it's like all of a sudden they're really stressed about the outcomes that they've been getting. It's like, hold up, the last 4 weeks we've been in exam period or whatever's going on at the time. Like, let's just reframe that a little bit. Or like you said, you go from one sentence to 2 paragraphs, and it's like, all right, we probably actually need to have a conversation about what's going on here. So being aware of that, particularly in an online setting, that for me is like, okay, we need to have a further conversation about this. And your standard check-in probably isn't going to be efficient or enough in this scenario. But yeah, just, I guess, taking the time to actually look at the check-ins from your clients each week and make sure you're on top of them. Yeah,
I think that's important. And I think you're definitely right. Like, speaking the language that your client's going to understand. I think if you're always, treating every single client the same, it's not going to fly unless you, like Jace, have the same client every time. Then that's absolutely fine. But if I've got like a 40-year-old bricklayer and a 21-year-old uni student, like, am I going to treat them the same? Like, no, because they're going to have different interests. They're going to speak different languages. And like, my wife will always laugh if I'm doing like phone consults, because she's like, she can tell who I'm talking to based on how I'm talking. So, I'll be like, yeah, mate, everything's great. If I'm talking to like, this 40-year-old tradie, but if it's like a younger girl, I'm not going to speak the same way. And then I think like one of the things I like to do is start with reasonably broad questions, and then they're almost like feelers, right? So it's like, because then you get a gauge, like, how's this person responding? And if they're giving you like real short, succinct answers, like you guys have said, it's like, okay, cool. That's how we're going to approach this entire process. Like, not just the consult, but even the check-ins. It's like, everything's short, succinct. This person wants 5 minutes of feedback and they want to know, what do I need to do differently next week? All right, thanks, Max. Talk to you next week. That's all they want, right? Whereas other people, it's like, okay, cool. Every single week, you're going to give me like an entire essay. So you're going to want some detailed feedback. Not only do you want detailed feedback, you want me to respond to what you've said. So you want me to go like, oh no, like, I'm sorry uni's so stressful. Oh yeah, that's no good. Like, I'm sorry that you broke up with your boyfriend. Like, they just want someone to like listen, right? So then it's like, okay, cool. I'm going to do that a little bit differently, like within reason. So I think that's really important. But I think, everybody, like all of us, we've been doing it long enough that it's kind of just an automatic process. But I think if you were a newer coach, like, not that you need a script, but I think having like a set system where you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to ask these questions first. Depending on how they answer, I'm going to go one of 2 directions. Like, I think it'd be good because, otherwise you could just end up in a bit of a mess.
Yeah, we made the comment the other day, like, being as proactive as possible to allow for the maximum amount of reactive. So the proactive in your check-in process is like, what questions do I need to ask? What metrics do I need to track to allow me to ask more questions if there needs to be? So it's like, and then that reactive is like, okay, all the boxes are red this week. Fuck, what do we do? Maybe that's hey, are you free for a Zoom call? Like, what the fuck's going on? Or it's like, hey, there's a little bit of a warning sign this week. Is everything okay? What's going on outside the gym? Was it just a blip? Like, are we all good? Move forwards. And then maybe like you're starting to see a couple of yellows. It's like, hey, like what's going on here? Make sure like you're ticking these boxes, dotting I's, crossing T's sort of thing. So yeah, that proactive approach then allows you to be reactive.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, like, if we think about that as well, like some people, like I've had other coaches be like, oh, like, if my client like hasn't given me feedback, like, what do I do? I'm like, if your client hasn't given you feedback, that is some very detailed feedback to go off. Like, that means like there's a huge issue that you straight away need to manage that. Like you said, like, you need to jump on a Zoom call or do whatever. And I think like for every coach, like, you want to have like some kind of system just to track like and everyone's a little bit different, but like, are they on track like week to week? And it's like you said, like I just use like green, yellow, red, real simple. But it's like if I have a yellow, it's like okay, cool. You're gonna have to go a little bit extra. It's like if I have 2 yellows in a row, it's like okay, cool. Here's what we're gonna do, and you just have those kind of things set up. And I think like things like that just make your own life easier as well.
Yeah, I literally have a spreadsheet with all of my clients, the date of the start of the week above it, and they get a green box for progress. Orange has stayed the same. Red is we've gone backwards in some way, and then yellow is no data. And it's like the no data is as big a warning sign as maybe like the orange
worst one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like okay, we need to. Hey, are you alive? Like what's happening? Yeah, so I think that's a very valuable tool for yourself as a coach, more for like Jace was talking about retention earlier. It's like getting on top of that stuff early to allow yourself to stop it before it gets too far. And yeah, jump in and help people, which is, I guess, what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like you guys were mentioning like language with your clients as well. I know we've spoken about this previously, but it's like proving how smart you are to your clients doesn't help anyone, like ever. If anything, if your client feels like they don't know what you're saying, then you're probably just going to make them doubt everything even more. And I think that's massive. And I think that even goes to like, if you're using like your social media, like are you using it to speak to clients or are you using it just to like portray how smart you are to the world? And I don't know if it's a lockdown thing, but Instagram recently, my interpretation is all those coaches have way too much time on their hands because like, do your clients care about like the similarities with like propulsion in a gait cycle to a squat? Like nobody cares about that except for us because we're weird. Like
because we're nerds.
Exactly, but it's like for the most part, like who cares? So like for me, that's something I changed. Like most of my Instagram is just like shit talking that like gets a bit of attention, but it's also deliberately in terms that people can understand. Like I'm never gonna. That's not the forum for me to like deep dive on anything complicated. But I think that's even more important with your clients. Like if I get a question from a client, basically always go to the simple answer first. And then if they ask for more information, then we deep dive. And that's the difference to what I used to do, which was every single time deep dive on every single question and try and give them as much like what I saw as value. But then I realized what they see as value is something that they can actually implement straight away.
Yeah, I think we as a group and definitely me personally probably take that like, here's the what. So here's what to do. Here's how to do it. And then if you want why, there's resources available or ask. Just because the main thing is, and I actually explained this in the consult as well, is like what I've tried to give you here is like the minimum effective dose of information. Because I want to give you the least amount possible so you can process it all, take it in and be able to execute straight away. If you want to know more about anything in your program, if you want to know why that exercise is there, why that rep range is there, why that intensity is set the way that it is, why it's a 4-week versus an 8-week program, like all of this shit, if you want to know it, it's all done. Like I actually think about all that shit when I write a program, but you don't need to know to get the outcome. If you want to know because you're a nerd like me, ask the question. Like I'm totally keen to expand that. But it, like you said, it needs to probably for most coaches go the other way. Like you said, it's that give them what, give them how, and then allow them set up or facilitate the ability for them to ask about the why.
Yeah.
So Jace, working maybe like similar client base in terms of demographic, but leaning now more into more and more people that are like at that sort of competitive level. Do you notice any of this stuff changes? And Max working with athletes in the past, because I think people have this misconception that the more advanced someone gets, the more why stuff they want to know. I don't actually particularly think that that's true.
Nah, they're so invested in the outcome that they almost just want you to tell them what to do. So I think that, yeah, you open up the platform for questions and interpretation. But I definitely, I don't know, once you kind of take a step with your training, I kind of feel like there's so many things to think about with that. And there's such a high level of commitment that they've built enough trust in you to understand that you've got them covered, and they just need to put all their effort into the task, which is, getting massive, getting shredded, comp prep for myself, or some performance outcome in a sporting setting, maybe for yourself, Max, with those athletes. But then, you need to be prepared to answer the question. Like, I wrote a program for someone the other day, trained for a very, very long time. They were just like, can we change all this and that, and do this and that? And I was like, well, this is why I've put this here. This is why this is here. You're doing this many, hinging movements a week. This movement typically kind of works with this. It doesn't stress this out. This last movement of the week takes into consideration fatigue and muscle damage. We can still get a lot of work in. And that's always open to anybody. Just tend to find those questions definitely are less than frequent, but we kind of, I guess, take a lot of those questions out by producing resources and making content. And you don't have to do that, but I definitely am a big believer of investment in time and giving people great value. And that's sometimes being able to access information whenever they feel like it. Yeah. So creating those resources, especially if you're getting the same questions often, could be a very, very valuable thing, which still takes the client first attitude, because they can access information whenever they feel like it. It's a question based off what they're telling you.
Yeah. And it allows you then to have a piece of high quality information that's really considered and sat down and thought about and produced. And then when you get that question, it's just like, bang, go read or watch this. It'll explain that for you. I think it's something that I'm guilty of myself, is like sometimes getting pushback when you haven't had it for a while or expected it for a while. It's like, I'm not doing enough leg work, or I feel like these exercises aren't working or whatever. And sometimes it's just like, you feel like it's a bit of an attack, and it's really important to make sure that you understand what the client is most likely looking for as clarification as to why you've selected the things that you had. Like I recently had a girl, same kind of thing, been training for a while, getting really good results, but with lockdown, noticed some issues with some hip function stuff, like not really getting into extension in a lot of the movements that she normally would. It was like, all right, we're going to do this, and this is going to go in as your hinge patterns, rather than just like the more targeted isolation style movements that she's used to. She's like, I don't feel like I'm doing enough work in my legs. I don't feel anything when I do this exercise. I don't feel anything when I do this. And I was like, part of me initially was like, just do the program, like do as you're told. But then it's like, sit back, think about it, and like, okay, she doesn't actually understand why this has gone in there. Sweet. I've put this in because X, Y, Z. It will then benefit you in then phase B, C, and D, because you can actually get into these positions better. And taking ownership of that as the coach is really important.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important. And I think like you work with athletes, it is different, like anyone with a performance goal. Because as Jay said, like they're going to do it. Like, so that's like the biggest thing, right? It's like they're so invested in that end goal that they're not going to not do it. If anything, like a lot of the time, you're just putting brakes on. Like, yes, settle. What I personally have found that between working with athletes and Gen Pop, is not that one's easier and harder. You just got to use your time a little bit differently. So with your Gen Pop clients or your newer clients, there's a little bit more hand holding. They're going to go through peaks and troughs of motivation, and they just want that support through that kind of area. With more like performance-based goals, it's more that you need to create the relationship to get the buy-in so that they're actually comfortable to ask questions. So for example, like when I was doing sports club stuff, it's like, you hang out with the gym. Most of my time was literally spent hanging out, talking shit. And that's the most valuable thing I could do, because everybody was comfortable talking to me, which meant if there was ever an issue, they would not hesitate. They would say like, oh, this hurts, they'll tell me. Even if it's like, hey, we went out and had a massive night last night, I feel like shit, they'll tell me, right? Whereas if I didn't have that relationship, they'd come in the next day, try and do the program as written and potentially injure themselves. And then that would be my problem in a massive way, especially like if they're worth a lot of money.
Rule number one of SNC, don't
hurt anyone. Exactly. But so it's like a little bit different there. And I think that's something I think there's a bit of a misconception that like, working with athletes is like this more hands-on, like super specific stuff. It's like, you're working with genetically gifted individuals that can pretty much do most things and everything will get them stronger. It's going to be more, okay, building those relationships. So you're like one of the team, everyone feels like they can talk to you. So you are really approachable, which is a great skill to have anyway. And I think, Gen Pop is not that you don't want to have that approachable thing. It's that you just want to be more focused on some of these other areas and just being aware that if you try and treat them the same way and give them a program and just expect them to do it for, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, like guess what? Some days they don't feel like training. And like you said before, if training's not in their top 3 priorities, they're not going to train. So I think, just adjusting the expectations and your approach is really important as well.
Yeah, 100%. So moving into the next part is like wearables and apps and sexy stuff. So your resting heart rate, HRV, all of this sort of stuff. Jace, you mentioned blood pressure earlier. Where do you guys put those versus these conversations?
I would say you want to make sure that what you're measuring is something that you actually need to measure. So I think there's some things that are just a good idea to measure. Like I think if you measure your resting heart rate and your blood pressure, that's great because we've got a heap of evidence that they're good predictors for a bunch of health conditions. So as a general rule, like in our assessments here, we track both those things. But beyond that, like when it comes to the HRV stuff, I think it's really cool. Don't get me wrong. I think it's really cool stuff, and I've definitely played around with it. I think outside of a certain couple of pieces of technology, most of it's bullshit. So like Whoop bands are bullshit, Aura rings are bullshit. Like I know people are going to be upset by me saying that, but like
get it, Max.
They are shit, right? Any optical sensor is not sensitive enough to do HRV. You need really like a ECG or similar. With that as well though, like if you've got people that are getting like a strain score or a recovery score and it's just like some computer algorithm, I'm sure we've all played around with it or had clients that are like, oh, my strain score is really high, so just take a rest day. How do you feel? Yeah, I feel good. Yeah. We'll train. Like it doesn't matter, right? Like I think even at the elite level, we had a bunch of things like, we track GPS data, so I could tell not only how far is someone run and how much time do they spend at different speed zones, combine that with their load in the gym. You have your acute to chronic workload work-rest ratio. But with that, it's like, even then, it's like, yeah, how you feeling? Yeah, good, okay, great. Or how do you feel? I'm cooked. Okay, cool. We're going to deload. So even with that, it's a little bit interesting. And the thing I'd say as well with heart rate variability, unless you're going to buy in and do that every single day, the measure is so sensitive and it's going to cause so many things cause it to vary that I don't necessarily think the technology is quite there. Like there are certain people like Joel Jameson's massive on it, really smart guy, great with his conditioning stuff. But I think unless you're working with a specific type of athlete, like anybody else has got no business really doing HRV.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think I used it maybe a couple of years ago when I sort of first moved into powerlifting. It was like there was days, thankfully I was kind of like, I don't really know what this is or what it even means. I'm just going to test it because someone said it was cool. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I'll just track it. And then some of the days that my HRV score was really poor were like PB lifts and shit. I was like, yeah, I don't know. Just anecdotally, I was like, doesn't really seem like this tells me much. And then obviously more and more, the more I read into it, it was like, yeah, it's maybe not that great for people in the gym.
Yeah, I mean, as well, I guess if anybody listening doesn't know what HRV is, so about the time in milliseconds, the variation of time in milliseconds between consecutive heartbeats.
Yeah.
So a very, very sensitive, and like as a physiology guy, I'm like, yeah, super cool. But I'm like, how useful is it? Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is, you got like the MyZones and the Polar and people tracking their heart rate and stuff. One of my big questions for people is, or even like tracking your macros, right? It's like, what are you doing with the information? Like you go for a run and like, yeah, I'm going to wear my chest strap. Why? Like, what are you going to do with that information? Like, are you actually tracking that over time to see, I'm able to maintain a similar pace at a lower heart rate, therefore my cardiovascular fitness is improved? Are you doing that? no, I've never thought about doing that. I'm like, okay, well, you measuring your heart rate is completely useless in that sense. What I would say on the flip side is if people find that having a wearable Fitbit or something like that is a trigger or a cue for them to be more active, then I'm 100% for it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, I guess.
It's that game element, right?
Yeah, just gamify everything for the Gen Pop because it needs to be enjoyable. They need to want to do it. So I think, like my wife's Fitbit, like when she hits 10,000 steps, like all these balloons appear on it. I'm like, okay, like, that's cool. But every time she's like, oh yeah, great, I've done it again. I'm like, well, that's what it's designed for.
Yeah.
But I think, you want to be careful putting too much value on it. And I'm sure we've all had the clients that are like, yeah, my Fitbit says I'm burning 3,000 calories a day, but I'm just not losing weight. And we're like, yeah, here we go, this conversation again.
Yeah. I think the wearables are there to maybe encourage some behaviors, like you said, Max. I don't think that they're that accurate with really anything. Maybe the heart rate stuff, maybe. But outside of that, it's like using specific metrics that you can interpret. And then, if that wearable gives someone the motivation to do an activity that you need them to do, so be it. Like, I got clients that have no wearables, so we don't track their average steps per day. Like, we don't do all that stuff, and we still get out. Like, fuck, I got clients that don't track macros and lose fat. Like, fuck me, yeah.
Like, exactly. It's all funny, man. Like, I've got some athletes. Like, I don't train any fighters at the moment, but I have previously, and that's when you're like, okay, we're focusing on specific conditioning tools for that. So with that, I'm like, yeah, we do resting heart rate and heart rate variability and blood pressure. And one of the markers was like, if your resting heart rate is above 60 and your heart rate variability is below 80, it's like, we're not going to do any of this stuff. We're just going to do so much aerobic work to get you to this point where it's actually useful. So in there, as part of the screen, it's like, okay, that was kind of useful, but how many people fall into that category? Not very many.
Yeah. I only like resting heart rate and like blood pressure sometimes, just for that like little hint. It's like someone's starting to get stressed, or it's a little hint to show them that like actually you're improving your health right now.
I think like it's definitely a good screening tool. Like we definitely do at the start. Because like if someone comes in and their blood pressure is like 170 over 110, I'm probably not going to be like, yeah, go do 5x5 back squats. Because like that person's a stroke. Like that's negligence on my part, right? So I think that's very, very useful. And like we encourage all of our clients, just like keep an eye on that kind of stuff. Like not necessarily as a performance metric, just because I don't want you to die. Like I want you to be like, live a healthy, happy life. So that's where I think resting heart rate and blood pressure is really important. Like I don't necessarily track it as like a performance metric. It's just like, I want this to be in a healthy range at all times. If it creeps up, maybe recovery is compromised, but that's when you'll typically see that in the subjective stuff anyway. Like I've never had anybody's blood pressure skyrocket and their heart rate go up, and for them to be like, I'm feeling calmer than I ever have in my life. Like it just doesn't happen that way.
Nah, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, awesome. So this will be an interesting one because Max is an S&C coach, Jason is a physique coach, and I'm not an S&C coach. I just get people strong. Talking about the topic of auto-regulation. So rep and reserve, RPE, Max used it's almost a forbidden word in S&C at times, of RPE. When we talk about this stuff and working with Gen Pop clients or moving into athletic clientele or specific like actual performance athletes, what is your baseline opinion of auto-regulation methods? What do you like? What do you not like? How do you apply them? And then does it change Gen Pop to performance athletes?
Well, I think RPE is not a forbidden term in S&C. I think, if anything, we had it long before powerlifters had it. It's just how it's applied that's a little bit different. Like so Mike T's taken that scale and put it and combined it with like that reps and reserve kind of thing, which for that is super useful. Personally, I'm going to go against the grain. I don't prescribe loads by RPE because I don't train many powerlifters at all. We have a couple here, but then I just still don't really. for me, like the RPE and auto regulation is kind of done on more of a macro level than a micro level. So again, like how hard a training session was, I definitely want to know that one. It's based on a session. And then also how hard the week was, how hard a whole training program was. Like I definitely want to know that. I think for me, because I predominantly work with athletes that do so many things, it'd just be too messy for me to go, okay, what's the RPE of this one set in the gym? Because, okay, what did you do yesterday? Oh, we did tempo runs, and then I did skills training for 90 minutes. That's going to have an impact on that as well. So that's why I go to session. If I was working with like purely powerlifters, I probably would go RPE to prescribed load because I think it's super useful as well. So for me, I'm like, I don't think one's better than the other. I think for me, just percentage-based stuff is easy, and it's easier for me to quantify, are you getting stronger objectively, like not just subjectively? So that's kind of my, I guess, view on it. For Gen Pop, I think it's similar. However, I think that a lot of the time they will auto-regulate themselves rather than a coach needing to do it. Like performance-based person, like I said before, sometimes we need to put the brakes on. Like, hey, I know you want to get stronger, but we also don't want to get injured. So we be, conscious of this workload that you're going through. Whereas Gen Pop people, they're going to miss sessions from time to time. They're going to take maybe not the most hardcore attitude all the time. So a lot of the time they will kind of deload and auto-regulate themselves a little bit. Not always. I think that's very client specific. So I think you've got to know your client a little bit there as well.
Yeah. Jace, in the physique world, how much value?
So when are we talking about like prescribing loads or just like managing fatigue?
Yeah, just general auto-regulation strategies. Which ones you like and use?
I think it depends on the client. Like I think that, beginner will auto-regulate themselves. I think an intermediate doesn't really need to deload as much as people say they do. It's just fucking cool. So they want to do it. I think that they don't train hard enough to, warrant a deload in most cases, especially like in a bodybuilding perspective. And it's just a case of learning how to push yourself. A lot of the time, like they'll just back out when it's real hard. And then they'll maybe, again, taking that perception of fatigue model. It's like, I read this, so I should do that. So I feel this way. So I need deload. But there are some people out there that do push themselves as well. So you've just got to know when, like, make provisions for fatigue management to be there somewhere down the track. Just don't be so dogmatic that you have to do it when you may not need to. I think it's the best, like, we're obviously working with some form of fatigue to a degree because that's going to get the adaptations that we want because it stimulates the fibers and, we get like tension on the muscle, and obviously the recovery of that, stimulates the growth if it's a hypertrophy phase, for example. But I think that getting too caught up in having like this set routine where, we deload at this time almost can shoot people in the foot. Sometimes you need them to be in the hole. It's like, if you feel shit and it's week 7 of an 8-week program,
good.
Sorry, but you got to ride this one out. It's like, we've done all this work to get here. Ride it out. You'll benefit from it later. Where, if it's week 2 and you're feeling like death, then it's like, all right, well, we either fucked up or something's going on that, reflects the effort and the volume, or you just bit off more than you could chew. Because I think everyone's got that client that's just like a bull at a gate. They don't know what 2 reps in reserve is or anything like that. They just, beast it and all that. So you just got to know, all right, well, they'll deload sooner. And then you've got those other ones where they'll deload later. So I like using rep and reserve. I think it's the best method for physique development. Like, obviously we're working with peripheral fatigue, so a lot. So having rep ranges and making sure they can adhere to a rep and reserve kind of like ticks both boxes. But then, outside of that, I think that, like, depending on the person and how advanced they are and all of those things will determine the frequency in which you need to deload them and manage their fatigue, or look at their under recovery, like from somewhere else as well. It's like, are there holes in your nutrition that you need to supplement, or that you need to eat more, or do you need to sleep more, or something like that? So it's not always the back off from training, sometimes there's other holes that could be filled. So
yeah, I think something that's interesting looking at sort of like the theme of today is like Gen Pop and athlete and stuff. I feel like there's a category in between. Like we talked about, you've got athletes who are like competitors and they're performance based, and that's your job is to get the maximum performance out of them in that realm. And then when we say Gen Pop, it's like everyone else. I don't know that actually covers everyone. So what I sort of like to do, and most of my clients fit into this space of like athletic population. It's like some of them might compete, but they wouldn't, if you ask them like, hey, what do you do? The first thing out of their face isn't, I'm a powerlifter. It's like their job or their whatever usually comes before that, which I'm one of those. I can compete in powerlifting, but I'm not a powerlifter. It's like not the first thing that comes to mind when you ask me what I do. So yeah, I think there's a scale that runs within that. And I think I work with those people typically that are in that top 3 priorities are going to be training at worst top 5. So rep and reserve and stuff like that is really valuable for that person, particularly from a strength outcome point of view. The biggest part, I guess, is like just understanding where things will fall short. There's going to be, like Max, we've talked about this before, like no model's perfect, but some of them are useful. So taking that approach to the rep and reserve model is like, cool. We try and caveat that by like having a predicted weight based on like maybe a testing week or your previous lifts or whatever, funneling through what your rep and reserve is programmed. And it's like, start there and then adjust your weight based on the rep and reserve.
Yeah.
I think the strongest case though for auto regulation, and it's something that's super popular at the moment, is like specificity for the female athlete. It's like I train, I think 99% of my client base right now is female. It's like auto regulation kind of does that job for me, like in terms of rep and reserve, in terms of auto regulation with their nutrition. They understand that if they want more carbs for a couple of days, that's okay. They understand like the hierarchy of their nutrition and all of that sort of stuff. So they can auto regulate that process as well. So it's like this education and empowerment to the client, like you can auto regulate this stuff yourself, and that communication prevents you from having to micromanage those things to such a refined level, which I think is the biggest thing for me, is like prescribing loads. If I expect you to hit a 100 kilo back squat this week and you're feeling like shit walking in the door for whatever reason, be it your menstrual cycle or be it just a shit sleep or you fought with your boyfriend on the way into the gym, like the rep and reserve model for me is more effective in that place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it kind of highlights, the whole topic we're talking about here, where it's like the people, not numbers, because RPE, percentage based or whatever, they can both be meaningless without the right context, and they can both be wrong or right depending on who you're applying it to. So like, I said sometimes I use percentage stuff. The only way I can do percentage stuff is if I've tested what somebody can do, right? You can't do 100% of nothing. So then it can be useful, but like, with a new client, like, what are you going to do? Test them on day one? Like, what if they've never really been in the gym before? Like, It's all going to be auto-regulated, right? It's like, work up till it feels kind of heavy. I'm happy with what that looks like. You're happy with how that feels. Great. And then we're just going to progress that over time. And then, the auto-regulation's going to come in from there. So I think, sometimes you got to take a step back and not get too bought into like any one thing. It's like, if you got the principle that like, okay, we're going to use progressive overload over time, whether that's through RPE, whether that's through percentages, whether, we're going to use reps in reserve, or we're going to have like a rep range. Like for a lot of, when I do like hypertrophy work, a lot of it's going to be a rep range. Like, we're going to go 8 to 12 reps. I want to have 2 reps in reserve on every set. I'm sure you guys do similar stuff like that. And then we can just track the volume over time. But like, you don't need to get too tied in, or in my opinion, tied into like one specific thing, because there's so many ways that it can work, and depending on the person, that's probably going to dictate like what tools you use at that time.
Yep. Yeah, so many people are going to like outrun certain tools depending on their training age. So, and then other tools aren't applicable for someone's goal, and then other tools are more applicable when someone's advanced. So you need to just have them in your box and play them when you need to.
Yeah, awesome. Sweet. That's kind of coming up to time. So closing thoughts, biggest takeaways from each of you that I guess like you would give to coaches just around like the conversation that we've had today. What message would you put out to coaches?
I would just say that you want to make sure that everything is catered to the client. Okay, that's like the most important thing. Within that though, what I would say is you want to have a system that works with that in mind. So don't just cater to the client, that's the recipe for disaster. But just make sure that you have got some principles or systems, whatever they are, like there's lots of ways to do it, that are focused on using the right tools at the right time for that person, and you're measuring what matters for that person, and then you're making changes based on those things. So I think, if you were to set up a system based on it, what type of client do you want to work with? What are some of the things that are important to them? And then structuring it out from there. I think that's probably going to be the biggest takeaway in my mind.
Yeah, I would say on top of those, it's important to build really good relationships with people. Sometimes those relationships can get real close. Like PT is a very intricate relationship when it comes to and professionalism at the same time. So don't lose sight of that person's goal, which can happen really, really easy. It's like always think about, why am I here? What am I doing for this person? If you have that mindset on top of those things that Max said, it's like match winning combination.
Yeah.
Everything you do is for that person. Like you can be a good person and like care about their weekend, but it's like, don't forget this person's trying to achieve this and this person's trying to achieve that.
Facilitate that outcome. Yeah, I guess like mine would be almost a summary of both of what you guys have said. Like, know who you train, know what problem you solve for them, and know how you do it. Systemize all of that in as much proactive manner as possible, and then be reactive to every individual and refine your method over time. If you can get that right, you're 99% of the way there. What that actually involves in terms of the specifics, whether it takes you 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, you'll figure it out just because you've got those things in place and you can review them. Awesome. Max, how do we find you, mate?
Find me where I'm on Instagram at max.strength, at Performance Hub _Melbourne, I believe. Nexus Performance as well. And the website is just performancehub.com.au if you're interested in that. And then I've got a link tree in the Insta anyway, so you can find all the goodies there.
# link in bio. Remember that meme of remember when you used to say things ironically and now they've just become part of your vocabulary? Link in bio is that for me right now.
Yeah,
it's like I used to be like, # link in bio, and now I'd have to put it in everything. It's like, fuck, I'm that guy. Awesome. So for us, at Jason Galea _STC, at Ben Scott STC, at STCfit Learning for all our coaching education stuff, at STCfit for all our client online coaching, face-to-face coaching, etc. If you're watching this and you're not aware, podcast is on Spotify and iTunes. Also, # link in bio from at STCfit Learning. If you just want to go there, you'll find articles, podcasts, all of that stuff in there. Tam will put contacts for Max in the show notes as well for the podcast, and probably when I email this out, I'll do that as well. So links and stuff will be in there. Feedback would be great. We'd love to hear what you guys thought, and any future topics, guests that you'd like to have us on. Awesome. Thanks a lot, boys. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
We'll see you next time.
See you, boys.